How many people on your team trust their leader? You might be surprised to know that 51% of employees do not trust their leader. Over half. And it is diminishing. It's crumbling. And Cory's research data shows it. Today's guest, Cory Scheer, is a researcher. He is founder and CEO of TrustCentric, a consultancy that helps organizations close the trust gap. That's the name of his book, Closing the Trust Gap. And he is here today to talk about trust, why it's going apart, what we can do about it, and how we as leaders can help our teams, our people, our organizations build trust, increase the value in the organization and in the lives of the people we serve, and do it well. Let's dive in with Cory right now. Cory Scheer, my friend, thank you so much for joining us on the Leadwell podcast.
Thank you, John. It's great to be with you today. Really, I'm excited and honored to be part of the show.
Well, since I've met you, I have trusted you. There's something about it that I just trust. I mean, what is that, Cory? Do you get that often?
Well, the more I talk about trust, the more I'm finding people want to talk about trust with me. And that's really, really cool and very fulfilling and rewarding. And it gives me continued affirmation of the work that I get to do every day with clients. So yes, I love that.
Yeah. I mean, just from me to you to everybody listening, I think that there's a good deal of character and competence that also come with that. And that's what we're diving into today is really closing this trust gap. And for those that don't know, that haven't read the book, but they need to go read the book, it's a phenomenal book. What is the trust gap, Cory?
Well, I probably should have made the gap word plural, but I thought we would just focus with one. I mean, it's the trust gap actually contains a lot of potential gaps and a few that really stand out. The number one gap is that where an organization could be compared to where they currently are, there is a gap. That is, there's no organization that has fully arrived.
Yeah.
And there's always an opportunity to improve the workplace culture, the communication, the problems that need to be solved, the opportunities for focus, the clarifying of vision and mission, the reinforcement and support of values, whatever the case may be. When you're dealing with people and you're dealing with policies and practices, there's always going to be opportunities for improvement to occur, for the gaps to be closed. But more specifically, there were a couple of research items I co-authored a national study with a gentleman by the name of Kurt Bartolich, who runs a company called Brand Certain. And he invited me to talk about, in my questions on the survey, he wanted me to talk about the employee leader trust gap specifically. And a couple of the data points that came back that were very alarming. The first one was 51% of frontline employees don't have a high level of trust for their leaders. So that's a huge trust gap.
It's over half, right? I heard you say
Over half,
51%.
51%. So, I mean, imagine if you have, if you have 500 employees, imagine 250 of them showing up every day, not having a high level of trust for their leaders. I call that the half-life of distrust. And just
Wow.
the operational efficiency when you take off from a runway, and if one of your engines were to go out, what would the pilot do? There would be an emergency landing. Yet on average, across all industries that we evaluated, that's exactly how companies are operating. They're operating with one engine. And then they wonder why we have things like poor retention of employees or poor productivity or poor advocacy, or even to the point where the people that we surveyed, they admitted that the just people are lazier and they're not going to work as hard when they don't trust their leaders. So the effects of this are very significant. And then the second gap in trust that we saw from the data that was really what inspired me to write the book was we found that leaders typically have a much higher perception of trustworthiness of them than employees actually have of them. And so this interesting gap where you may ask a CEO, how much do your employees trust you? And they may say 8 out of 10. And then you go ask the frontline employees or the individual contributors and they say, it's more like 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10. So we dimensionalized that gap. And The gap in the perception of trust between leaders and frontline employees is 31% on average. And so
Wow.
when you dimensionalize this, when you can look at this and you can measure it, the good part is that although it's difficult to look at initially, it becomes very, very helpful. And then ultimately, it can become hopeful if you are willing and if you have the courage to do something about it. If you
Mhm.
choose to excuse the data or do nothing about the data, about that reality, then you will continue to get the results that you are currently experiencing.
I'm curious because you put that out there. It's so clear. And I know there's a story in the book, but maybe there's another story. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Like if I, John, am sitting there and you, Cory, take this through and we do the whole organization and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I thought I was a trustworthy guy. I thought that we operated with integrity. I thought that we did this. I gave myself a 9 out of 10 because I ain't perfect. And I come back and everybody else says 4 out of 10. Why wouldn't I immediately try to rectify this?
I I have I've received a lot of different responses to that. I'll answer it though for myself
Hmm.
because I've been there and I've worked with toxic employees that I could not figure out how to wrap my brain around what the dynamic was occurring in that team dynamic or that workplace dynamic. And as
Mm,
the leader of that team, the core emotion that I experienced, and I know that we all experience things differently, but the core emotion that I was experiencing was shame. Because if I would
mm,
have admitted, because I had been with that team now for a couple of years, so if I would have admitted that we had this significant trust gap that needed to be addressed, that would have been me saying, I have ownership in this. I need to take responsibility. And for
yeah,
me personally, like there was a little bit of shame there and
yeah,
embarrassment. And I think that that's a reality that the longer you are with a team, the longer you are with an organization, the harder it is to admit that something might be wrong as a result of either your direct leadership or
yeah,
perhaps a lack of addressing certain things that had needed to be addressed maybe months or years ago. I think that there's
yeah,
a real dynamic. Interestingly, though, I think that there's an opportunity where I see from new leaders who engage with us, they're new, they don't have a lot of things that they're bringing into the conversation, so they're trying to assess and get as clear of a picture as possible. So when people ask me who do I typically work with, I say I work with two types of clients typically. Number one, leaders who are beginning a new season of leadership, whether
mhm,
they're brand new to that position or they're brand new to that company or whatever the case may be. So they're beginning a new season, or something is going on within their organization where they know that they've got to make the conscious decision to begin again.
mm,
And that's where, even if you've been there 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, but there are other indicators or warning lights going on all over the place saying you have to reset, you've got to begin again. That's the opportunity for an existing leader to say, we need to reset. And when you are willing to reset, now you know that you've got to do a full assessment of what's actually going on within our workplace culture. And once you make that declaration, it's amazing how quickly you can actually move to productive, generative, future looking conversations to improve your overall workplace culture health. And that's when things get very, very exciting and hopeful.
yeah. I mean, anytime we're taking that step, right? And it, at least to me, sitting here thinking about it, it feels as though if every single day, if every single week, the people around me, myself, my organization, are all moving towards a place where we trust each other more, where we're having better dialogue, where it's healthy in terms of our relationship, the work we're doing, the results. Like that is going to be one of the most engaging times of work. You lay out a trust proposition in the book. Can you explain the trust proposition to everybody that's listening so we kind of know what are we talking about and in what direction are we moving?
Yeah, it's one of it was actually the what I was going to originally title the book was the trust
Mm.
proposition, but my wife in her wisdom and her discernment, we were driving down the road and I
Everybody
said,
needs a good discerner.
oh my goodness. And, we were driving west on I-70 and I had just had a conversation with my developmental editor for the book on the phone. And she kind of said, after the conversation, she kind of looked at me and she said, I wonder if you should call the book something different than the trust
Mm.
proposition. I was like, but like you're questioning the title of my book, like it's my title. And she's like, well, nobody knows what the trust proposition is yet. That's what you're
Mm.
offering that as a solution to the real problem. And so I, of course, said, well, now I'm very curious. What are your thoughts? And she said, well, I think you should call it closing the trust gap. And as soon as she said
Whoa.
it, John, I was like, oh my gosh. And
She had it as clear as what it is today.
she absolutely. And she said,
Wow.
if I didn't know you and if I saw that book title on the bookshelf, I would buy that book just
Mm.
because I've experienced trust gaps in different parts of my life, vocationally or
Yeah.
whatever. And so I would want to know, how do I close the trust gap? And within
Yeah.
the book, the trust proposition is one of the ways that we do that. And the trust proposition is, of course, a play on words with the value proposition.
Hmm.
The value proposition was a term identified 40 or 50 years ago by a business leader, and he was basically articulating and defining this transaction that occurs in our mind as consumers or buyers when we put forth our time or our money in order to buy something of value in our perception. And what we're doing there is we're taking action on the worth of something. So worth is a
Hmm.
really critical part of value proposition. We assign what the worth of something is, because if it is not worth it to us, we will not buy it or we will not spend time pursuing it. So that value proposition is really critical. And I learned about value proposition and all of the dynamics in my some of my educational training with my executive MBA. So I was familiar with that phrase, but I then just had a different conversation with another leader when I was doing a lot of my doctoral work on trust and the relationship between trust and then value and loyalty, and how trust has to precede value creation and value creation has to precede loyalty for the consumer. That was a theoretical framework that I used
Mm.
some amazing researchers for my doctoral work, and I used their framework in order to run my data through it. But the idea is, well, if the value proposition is all about taking action on the worth of something,
Hmm.
and if the definition of trust is that trust is the firm belief in the truth of something, so in my mind, I thought, well, what if we thought about a different type of a proposition? What if we talked about the trust proposition? And so the trust proposition is not taking action on the worth of something. The trust proposition is taking action on the truth of something. So,
Mm.
to your earlier question, one of the reasons why I think leaders and teams may have a difficult time elevating trust to its appropriate priority is because maybe they don't have a shared framework and understanding about what trust actually is. And then maybe their systems and their ethos and maybe their shared commitments are not pointed towards taking action on the truth of things. Maybe they're limiting their efforts by only taking action on the worth of something. So the
Mm.
advantage is that most companies are built in a way to where they're always about value proposition. How do we create more value for the consumer? But
Hmm.
what research says is that in order to maximize value proposition, you have to increase trust. So it's this combination of living out your trust proposition, living out your value proposition. And those two things, when you think of the companies that are they're seemingly unstoppable, it's
Mm.
because they have an incredible value proposition that is supported fully by an amazing trust proposition. So now the cool part about this whole thing is literally last week I got notification that we trademarked the trust proposition, and it's now
Woohoo!
it's official. So that's been really cool, just to continue to be very, very committed to that terminology and that kind of approach. And what it says is that trust does not have to remain ethereal, or it doesn't have to
Mm.
remain kind of philosophical or theoretical. That it's something that it can actually action can be taken towards it if we are committed to the appropriate model and the priority of doing that in our day-to-day decisions as leaders and as teams.
Oh, it did. I'm holding up something here for those that are watching online, right? But you said these three circles, and it is trust precedes value, and value precedes loyalty. And if I were to reflect back, what I just heard is that not only for our external value proposition as organizations, right? Whether we're mission driven, not for profit, small business, big old corporation, whatever it is, publicly traded, that value proposition of what we provide, a service that people want to engage with us for, is preceded by our external trust, like do they trust us, right? And also my brain heard, man, your value proposition is a little bit of your external kind of trust measure. Are people engaging with you because they value you and they trust you? But is the trust proposition a little bit of my, this must be true internal to then get the best of that external?
And it aligns with my version of the truth, resonates with their version of the truth. And so as a result of that, I believe in that because our truths are similar.
Mm,
When we believe in something that is true and that aligns with our own truth,
mm,
does that increase or decrease our value of them? It increases that, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah,
So then our decisions, our behaviors are not just driven by, is it worth it? Our decisions are informed by, do we trust it?
yeah.
And that is why, and so let's make this very practical. What's the name of a brand or a company that you trust? You just trust them.
Apple.
Okay,
But they are running everything that we are doing this podcast on.
but if you were to go, I mean, I just bought 6 cell phones for my
Mm,
kids, all
yep,
Apple devices. Now let me
yep.
tell you, when you're sitting in that cell phone store getting ready to purchase 6, you're like, is this really worth it?
Yeah, I bet.
There's no way that I would spend the money that I would on those
Yeah,
6 phones, two for,
yeah,
one for my wife and I, and then our 4 kids. There's no way that I would spend money from purely a value proposition standpoint. There
yeah.
are other alternatives. I can go buy a different kind of a phone. I can go
Mm-hmm.
buy, other alternatives to the specific model that I'm looking at.
Yeah,
But it isn't just informed by value and that
yeah,
construct of value. It's critical, and it's not like we're willing to spend whatever, but
yeah,
we're willing to spend the money because we trust that it will deliver, and we trust that what they are about aligns with what we want to be about as well. And it's
yeah,
the merging of those two truths. That's when our value shoots up. And so in the same way, obviously as a consumer, we experience that, but think about that internally with other team members or leaders or teams that you were a part of, where your value in them is informed deeply by simply how much you trust them, which means that you
yeah,
value their disagreements, you
yeah,
value their doubt of certain things, because you know that you trust that they're coming at that from a place of respect and honor
yeah,
and trying to
yeah,
make things better. It's not they're not or you value their reflection, or you value their silence, not that they're
yeah.
weaponizing their silence against you, but because you trust that they have good intentions and your truths are matching. And
I, it's playing out in my head in terms of just the benefit of the doubt that I give a person, and also perhaps you've had this play out like I've had this play out, where sometimes there's a piece of data or there's a disagreement or there's just this idea that bubbles up. And at some point it's, oh, who said that? Or where did this come from? And they put in that name of somebody that you would just, you go to the grave over, right? Like you trust them as much as you can trust them. And it's like, oh, well, if they said it, it must be true. I mean, we've all said things like that, right? And this is exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, or even, if a trusted leader asks you to do
Mm,
more or do something different, you're
yeah.
going to say yes to that. If a toxic leader asks you
Mm.
to do more, what are you going to do with your time? It's not worth it. I'm not
I'm
going
going
to
to
work.
guard it, right? I'm going to second guess. I'm not going to give positive intent. I'm
That's
going
right.
to, I'm going to think, are they operating in my best interest or is it in their best interest? Are they
That's
doing
right.
things for the company or are they doing things because I'm actually setting them up for a political move that they're trying to make? Like all of this stuff goes through your head.
And those are all probably very valid questions, but as every time you ask that question without validating
Mm,
in terms of getting on the same page with that person, or it's validated every time you ask that question, their behaviors demonstrate that your question was the right question. Now you begin to start seeing the gap. And that's
yeah,
that's the whole premise of the book. And some people have asked me, well, why didn't you call it bridging the trust gap? It's like, I
yeah.
don't want to build a bridge. Bridges are expensive and they break apart.
I
let's
love it.
let's close the gap. Let's
Yes.
the cover of the book has a broken bridge, but it's a play on, like, we're not going
Yeah.
to build a bridge over the bridge, we're going to close the
Yeah.
gap.
Yeah.
Like, that's the goal. We got to close the gap. It's not about building bridges. It's
Yeah,
about
and that's
closing
so
it.
so true that would, I mean, there's tons of places in life where we have just chasms of division, and it's not just, this rope bridge or this structural bridge, but really it's what can we
Closing.
do to reconcile this thing and bring it together. Okay, so what gets in the way, right? You said if you, Cory, and I, John, look at the same color and I say that's yellow and you say no, that's purple, and we disagree on the truth of something, right? And I use a very meaningless
Yeah.
example. Unless you and I are LSU Tiger fans, then we're going to go all up in arms about it, apparently. But on the whole, that's a meaningless example. But there are real examples of where what you say is true and what I think is true are two totally different things. What else gets in the way of trust?
It's a great question. And I think the next thing that I would share is, and it goes into the book itself, it talks about the structure of trust. So this is where, when there is an incomplete understanding of the structural components of trust, then we have more trust dynamics that can occur that are not positive. So, for example, we know from the research that there are three primary building blocks of building trust. The first one is competency. That includes technical competency, communication competency, project management competency, time management competency, financial competency. These are all of the things that typically people are hired to do within a company. These are your resume skills. These are the things that you can build. You can go get professional development. You can get a different kind of an educational experience. These are the competency built. They're critical, but that's only one of the three building blocks of trust. The second
Mm,
building block of trust is problem solving. So problem solving means not only a proper problem solving process, that's change management, that's critical thinking, that's the ability to navigate through conflict and resolve it appropriately with healthy intent, but it's also the ability to identify problems before they even become a problem, that we
mm,
create them as a problem. So this is that anticipatory thinking about longer term implications of what we're doing right now so that we can prevent those problems from occurring. And then the third building block that is vital, that our data shows is the most challenging building block for many organizations, is the building block of caring for others. So
mm,
this is active listening, appreciative inquiry, empathy, sympathy, caring for the needs of the whole person. So the idea is, or what the data says is that you may have the most competent problem solver in the organization, but if they don't care about people, they are
mm.
breaching trust. Or you may have the nicest person with the purest intent, but if they are not competent in I don't need the super syrupy, sweet, nice airline pilot. I need the respectful airline pilot that can solve a problem if we had turbulence, that
Yeah,
is competent enough to take off and land my plane. I don't
yeah,
like they don't need to be super nice all of the time. I need them to have all three of those building blocks in order for me to be okay. And so, in the
yeah,
same way within a company, like this constant, as a leader now with this construct of competency, problem solving, and care for others, now instead of me saying, I don't trust that person or I don't trust that policy or practice, I
mm,
can say, what is causing me unrest about that team member right now is they are not identifying the right problems to solve. And as a
mm,
result of that, the effect is they are breaking down trust.
yeah,
Or with this particular policy or practice that we're doing, what is causing me angst is that it doesn't demonstrate care for our other team members or for our customers. And so because of that, I don't trust it because that
mm,
doesn't align with my version of the truth and what the truth should be. And so as a result of that, we either can change it or we can continue to create distrust with that policy or that practice or that team member. So that's
and,
where you take something ethereal and universal and you break it down
yeah.
into pieces where you can actually measure it.
And not only measure it, like that measurement, but as you're going through that, and for those that think about courageous conversations and resolving conflict, and go back, rewind, listen to the words that Cory just shared, because what that structure did was it actually took a very large majority, if not all of the problems we have with people, and we turned them to the problems that we actually have, right? The language that you flipped on was, instead of Jim's a jerk, is
Right.
we are not solving the right problems, and thus
Right.
I'm frustrated with Jim. or whatever that might be. And all of those kind of coaching and teaching and team building, and all of us go through those things, and we talk about, go towards the problem, don't attack the individual, do this, because when we do, we further diminish trust. And in your language and in your model, you've given us not only the ingredients, if you will, those interrelated pieces, but it also helps us move into, how do I actually go after the real problem that exists?
And if we don't do that and we're in a leadership position, guess what every other team member is now thinking about us?
Yeah.
My leader is not competent enough to go have that conversation because they don't recognize it. My leader is not willing to solve the right problem. My leader does not care for me enough to be able to go address this very, very challenging personnel dynamic that is causing distress among all of us. And so, as a result of that, not only do I not trust that other person, I don't trust my leader. And now you have two gaps that are occurring, and the leader is saying, well, but they're very, very proficient in what they do, or they're a bulldog when it comes to problem solving. The challenge is that you cannot overcompensate with one building block to make up for a deficiency in another building block of trust. You have to have all three. They have to be strong, and otherwise you begin to have that wobbly three leg of the stool dynamic.
Yeah.
Making one leg of the stool longer doesn't actually solve the problem. It's not possible. You have to have all three.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Cory, if I'm that pilot that you talked about, that hopefully is a trustworthy pilot, my problem is I just want to keep flying the plane right now. But I also know that we need to bring this down. So I'm that leader, and I'm looking at a wobbly stool. I've heard the structure. I'm with you on trust precedes value, precedes loyalty. I want 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Like, I want this match. What do I do?
So the and we line it out in the book, the way to take action on truth, the way to live out your trust proposition, it's three things. It's three steps. The first one is you have to assess. It could be quantitative, it could be qualitative where you're listening, it could be creating a circle, a conversation where you're simply getting feedback from other people. You may do an organizational trust assessment. We deploy trust assessments frequently where it gives you the deep dive on that. There's certainly a lot of ways that you can do that. Number two, you then have to apply a shared framework. You have to create a common language and commitment around trust. We like the model that we use because it's simple. I call it a back of the napkin model. Competency, problem solving, and care for others. We're simply expanding the work of researchers 20 years ago. They've proven it. We're clarifying it. We've now packaged it in a way that people can just say it's easy, it's memorable. We can incorporate this into our day-to-day conversation, not just at some keynote speech or at a workshop that we listen to, but it's something that we can really make a part of our ethos. But then the third thing is, and the most important thing ultimately that we have to do is we have to take action. We have to take action on the truth. If we stand by, if we become passive, if we become complacent, if we deprioritize this, we will get the exact results that we have wired our time and energy towards. And we will continue to be frustrated. We'll see negative results with our other key performance indicators like retention, like engagement, like work ethic, like the overall workplace culture. But there's always an opportunity to assess, to apply the framework, and then to take action on it. And then when we do those things, it is incredible what can start to occur. And people will work harder, they will stay longer, they will be more creative, they will have more freedom to disagree because they know that it's not about questioning somebody else's truth. It's about having a critical conversation because of a shared truth. And that's when these places become almost magical to work at. You're like, there's something in the water here that's so amazing. And really, what
Yeah.
people are doing is they're just staying committed to the core tenets of what it means to strengthen trust.
I mean, just imagine all of the brain space that is taken up by all of the second guessing, all of the, am I reading their motives right? All of the inferencing that all of us might do in an unhealthy, toxic organization. Imagine if all of that's gone. Imagine if 99% of that is gone. How much we might actually enjoy working together, and how much we might get done for the people we serve. Cory, thank
That's
you for this book. This is Awesome. I told Cory before we started, and y'all need to get Closing the Trust Gap, but I told him before we started, I was like, I'm about halfway through. I'm not done. It would have been the sweet spot to be like, I finished the book. Da, da, da. So I got my own work to do. I need to take action on finishing that book and continue to roll it out. Before we go, my friend, we ask everybody this, and I've been dying to hear your answer this whole time. Cory, what does it mean to you to lead well?
Well, I'll tell you what the data says is required of us to lead well, and it's to start with trust.
Hmm.
And it starts right here.
Hmm.
Am I trustworthy? Am I competent? Am I solving the right problems? Am I demonstrating care for others? And then it begins to go out in concentric circles. But in order for us to lead well, we have to start with trust.
There we go. Leading well starts with trust. Cory, where can people connect with you? Whether it's for the book, whether it's for the organizational assessment, keynotes, whatever it is, what's the best place and ways to connect with you?
LinkedIn is always a good place to start. I spend a fair amount of time on LinkedIn posting some things. I've got a newsletter that's available there. I always respond to people who want to connect. That's not a problem. And then the website for the company that I am the founder of, it's called TrustCentric Consulting, and that's www.trustcentricconsulting.com. And then the book you can find on Amazon. Just look up Closing the Trust Gap and look for the book with the blue broken bridge, and you'll find it.
That's right. Everybody go out, grab that book. We will put all the links in the show notes. Cory Scheer, thank you so much for being here today. It's been an absolute blessing and a joy.
Thank you so much.
Everybody else, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, be well, lead on, and God bless.